Ey, hola.
Okay, good morning. Good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Well, for the IEB, it's a true honor to have the presence at our center of the Professor Michael Porter. He is the leading authority in the field of competitive strategy. Michael Porter is also a professor at Harvard Business School, one of the most prestigious centers of education in the world, more or less like the IEB, of course. Okay. Well, I want to send to you, Professor Porter, our kindness welcome, and I am sure that our students will take advantage of your lesson and enjoy your speech. And I am sure for this, because we know that your studies and publications are very, very famous around the world. And mainly because we know about your capacity and brilliance of your speeches. Well, in fact, throughout the history of strategy, there has been many important protagonists. Julio César, Napoleón Bonaparte, Hernán Cortés, Pedro Sánchez. It's a mistake. It's a prime minister of Spain. He's a very amazing person. Okay, but in all seriousness, all of them were brilliant, intelligent, if not a bit bloody. But fortunately for us, our guest today is also brilliant, intelligent, friendly, not bloody, I hope. But for that reason, as we said before, we are very thankful and honored for your presence here today. Well, I don't want to prolong my words. I only want to repeat our welcome to the Professor Michael Porter and request for him a strong round of applause. Thank you very much.
Good morning, all. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome Professor Michael Porter, especially because he's one of the persons who influenced me to spend half of my professional corporate life working on strat planning. Then, thank you very much, Prof. Porter. Well, actually, Federico, who is joining us today, and myself, will ask Professor Porter some questions for him to illustrate us with his knowledge. And then, if you want, we can start with the first one. Professor, we have seen across the time how corporations' KPIs evolve, and then from free cash flow to EBITDA, and then to economic value. What is, on your view, the correlation in between them, and why economic value is more attractive for management purposes?
Well, I'm not sure I would buy the fact that economic value is the right measure. Economic value, as I understand it, it's used in different ways, but it usually means value to the customer, what the customer will pay. And that's part of value, but the question is, how much does it cost to deliver that value? So you got to look at how much the customer will pay versus how much it costs to deliver, and that then should be the metric. And that's basically profit. So I think trying to do those calculations is a little bit complicated and maybe a bit confusing. I think that we believe that the most fundamental measure of success of a company is various measures of return on capital employed. That we can't just worry about the profitability, the margin. We have to capture the utilization of capital. And one of the things that we see today that has become really a very prominent driver of value is what's called asset light. You've probably heard of asset light strategies. That's where you find creative ways to reduce the amount of assets required to actually deliver your product or service. For example, Apple is legendary at this. What they do is they stretch out the payment to their suppliers essentially longer than it takes for the payment from the customers to come to them, so they actually can operate with negative capital. And when you have an asset-light model like that, you get very high multiples in the stock market. Amazon is a little bit like that as well. So now there's some other good concepts. I mean, I think EVA is a pretty good measure because it really does take into account not just the profitability, but also the cost of the capital. So I think any good measure has got to recognize both. It's got to capture profitability and the difference between price and cost, but it's also got to capture the capital employed. And I think if I were studying a company, I'd be looking at multiple measures. I'd also be looking at market capitalization, how the stock market is valuing the company, which has to do with how the investors perceive the value. And I think all those things, if you compare them and look at them at the same time, you can often get real insight into what's going on in the company and hopefully how to improve it. So it's a very good topic, and there's this constant quest for the magic measure. And there is no perfect measure. It does not exist. It's too complicated. So I think you need to use multiple measures to actually understand.
Thank you very much.
Professor. It's a pleasure to be with you here. For senior managers, strategy formulation addressed towards value creation would have different focuses. The objective could be to expand revenue opportunities by entering a new market, deciding a growth strategy for a certain product or a certain market, or by focusing on business diversification strategies. How do you develop a strategic business framework based on value creation?
Well, I think that's a whole course, which we don't have time for today, but let me just make a few comments there. I think that the first thing that you have to do when you develop a strategy is the management team has to be aligned on that strategy. You can't have different management team members wanting to think about strategy differently. They have to come together and reach a consensus. And this is sometimes challenging. This person in finance wants to do this, and this person in marketing wants to do this. But ultimately, any strategy has to be a unified, integrated way of competing that all functions can buy into and do their part. A strategy is holistic. It's how you put the marketing together with the production, together with the service, together with the branding, together with all the pieces of the business. So every manager has to be aligned with the overall strategy. Now, the key ideas in strategy are strategy really consists of two pieces. One is a unique value proposition for the customer. All strategies have to have a different, distinctive way of creating value for the customer than their competitors. If you're trying to compete value in the same way, you have sort of a zero-sum competition. You're both trying to do the same thing, and what happens is your price goes down, and actually the customer doesn't have any choice. The customer only gets one thing. A good strategy starts with a unique value proposition. Do you want to provide, do some customers want more service and more support, other customers don't need it? Those are two different value propositions. And when you're developing a strategy, the idea is not to copy somebody else. The idea is to find a group of customers that have not been served well and design the value proposition for those customers. All great strategies look like that. So the value proposition is really what customers are you serving? A good strategy chooses the customers. It doesn't just inherit the customers. It chooses the customers the company wants to serve. Because you can't serve all the customers equally well. You can't meet everybody's needs. The needs are different. You've got to figure out whose needs you're going to try to meet. So always think of strategy as you get to choose the customers, and rather than just who shows up. You've got to not just take whoever comes and try to serve them. You've got to try to identify who you can serve uniquely well and find them and access them and persuade them that you're the right player. So that's the value proposition. The second part of a strategy is a unique operating model, or what I call the value chain. to deliver a different value proposition, you've got to compete in a different way. You've got to do marketing differently, production differently, service differently. All the parts of the value chain need to be adapted to actually deliver on whatever unique value you're trying to deliver. So again, there's, we teach strategy at HBS, and I've taught that for many years, and obviously we teach by the case method, and strategies, there's no one formula for strategy. There's some principles, but the essence of strategy is doing it differently than somebody else. So strategy is, you've got to invent a strategy. You can't just copy somebody else's strategy. And so those are some of the key ideas. But I do want to come back to the idea that as you go through the process, you're going to have a management team, and different people on the team are going to have different ideas. But at the end of the day, you have to be aligned. You cannot succeed if different managers in the company are pursuing different strategies, or if they're fighting over what the strategy should be. I see that all the time, and it just never works. So, because strategy is essentially holistic. It's about putting all the pieces together across all the functions of the business into a kind of coherent view of how to deliver for this particular customer group or that particular customer group.
Welcome back to 1985. You introduced in your book Competitive Advantage the concept of value chain. You just mentioned it. And then looking at the competitive advantages, we have basically two options: to set yourself apart of your competitors, or to have a lower cost base. And then to combine both strategy at the same time doesn't look like easy though. And how is it possible to achieve though through the value chain analysis?
So let's all understand the value chain. You all sort of know, you clearly know what that is. It's essentially the set of activities involved in conducting a business. Service, product development, all the activities. There's a framework for kind of organizing those activities. When you are in a business, you're just doing lots of things, and the value chain is the tool for identifying all those things, so that you can look at them, as a group. The value chain is then sort of the fundamental unit to understand competitive advantage. All competitive advantage comes from things you do in the value chain. It could come from product development. It could come from being really low cost in manufacturing. It could come from having the best sales force. It could come from having the best after-sales service. So to really understand value chain, you can't think of the company as a whole. You've got to get down to really some kind of advantage. You've got to get down to the value chain, okay? And then you have to have the value chain where the pieces fit together. The way you do marketing reinforces the way you do production, reinforces the way you do service, reinforces the way you develop your brand image. So the value chain is really the plumbing, underneath the overall strategy. And now you mentioned low cost. What we know is that there's two basic types of competitive advantage. One is low cost. And if you can find a way to do something more efficiently than your competitors, not just one time, but because you've got a better model, then that can be an advantage. And if you're lower cost and you can achieve a similar price, you will be more profitable. Again, strategy is about superior profitability. That's what it's about. If you don't want to be superior, you don't really need a strategy. You can do a little bit of everything. But the essence of strategy is superior profitability, and one way to have superior profitability is to be economically more efficient, structurally, to deliver the product at lower cost. Okay. The other competitive advantage is to deliver something that the customer will pay more for, and that's what we call differentiation. To produce a product that people value more because that product will help them be more effective at what they do or in their business. So, there's lots of examples here, and it would take maybe too long to talk about some examples, but you could probably all think of companies that are just really low cost, and they pass that cost on, maybe a little lower price, and the product is okay, it's not unique or anything, but it's good enough, and you really like the low price. So, Ryanair in airlines. I mean, I won't go on Ryanair. I hate it. The service is lousy. The airports you take off from are, I don't want to do that. And luckily, I don't have to because I can afford to go on, you know, Iberia or some other airline that has a different way of achieving competitive advantage, which is more on service and kind of providing the right environment for the customer and so forth. So differentiation involves a whole set of different things than low cost. And usually what we discover is you can't do both at the same time. It's very hard to be the unique company that gets the higher price and also be the lowest cost, because usually what it takes to get a higher price is better people, more service, products with more features, and those things are costly. You know, to develop a product with 10 features is more costly than developing a product with 5 features. The production is also usually different. So we've often said that, you know, once in a while it can happen for a short period of time that you can be both lowest cost and differentiated in the same business, but usually over time somebody comes in and finds that customer segment that doesn't really need all of the features and really focuses on that and that customer group. So you know, that's kind of the dynamic of price versus cost, and then that all then relates to the plumbing is the value chain, and it's how you go about marketing, how you go about production, what your supply chain looks like. There's not one best supply chain. There's different supply chains that have to do with how frequently the delivery is, you know, what kind of service the customer wants with the delivery, and you can have a very simple supply chain that just shows up and throws the package, you know, with the customer, and you can have another supply chain where somebody provides you a lot of support and service. And so, in fact, one of the things we say, and this is sometimes shocking, is there's no such thing as a good supply chain. There's no such thing as good marketing. There's only good marketing for a particular strategy. And the best marketing for this strategy is not the best way of marketing for that strategy. And so I think we have to understand that strategy is putting all the functions together, recognizing the diversity of needs in the market, and putting those two things together. Hopefully that, I could go on, but we'll stop.
Professor, business succeed or fail based on their competitive advantages, no? And we have seen a number of innovative business practices that have been really milestones, but competitive advantages is evolving real fast. There's been a tremendous evolution in the last 20 years, but what's a bit scary is what's coming on now with these business evolution. What's your perspective of the future we're going to confront?
Well, that's a fairly general question. I will tell you that you know, competition is always changing, and that creates new needs from customers, and technology creates new opportunities for doing things, production or whatever, you know, delivery or whatever it is. And what we you know, what we see is this constant search for something unique, because that's what allows you to succeed. And that unique could be better and higher price, or it could be just what you only need, not buying too much. Therefore, it can be lower cost. And these things, and there's this constant process, and there's no, you know, in any economy there are thousands of different ideas for strategy that apply in different industries, and companies are always coming up with a new innovation or a new idea about what's a space, what's an opportunity that's not met. And you know, one can't really generalize about, you know, what strategy innovations, every strategy is different if it's going to be successful than the competitors. Therefore, every strategy that's successful is an innovation. Nobody's done it quite that way before. So entrepreneurs are always looking for the unmet needs. They're always looking at the way to use technology differently. You know, two of the things that we see really very, very important today are one point I've already made, and that is the concept of asset light. This is a new insight about competition and the asset-light model, that is, you use as little capital as possible, find creative ways to not have to use as much capital. If you can find that in an industry, you can often find a new space, which allows you to, achieve really high returns on capital. You know, if you don't have to use many assets, then your capital return is very, very high. So asset light is one of those things that's affected a lot of industries. Another one, and more broadly, I think the thing that's had the most impact on strategy ideas lately is information technology, is the whole digital transformation. In virtually every industry, you can do things differently with digital technology than you could before we had the level of expertise we have now, including the smart products that have sensors and create all this new data. I just gave a speech at the big event here on the next frontier of digital, and that is augmented reality. I don't know if you all know what that is. But augmented reality is where there's a different interface between the digital information and the human. And right now, the problem with digital is the way you get digital is you have to look at a computer screen, and it's flat. And then you've got to figure out what that information on the screen means for what you want to actually do in the real world. And digital data is two-dimensional, and the real world is three-dimensional. And the question is how to take the 2D data and figure out how to use it in the 3D world. And that's what augmented reality is. It's where you superimpose your digital information onto the user's view of the real world. So a good example, that we all know is the heads-up display in a car, which is not the most efficient way going forward. We're not going to see that for too much longer. But heads-up display is where instead of looking at a GPS screen down on the dashboard and then trying to figure out what you're supposed to do when you turn, and sometimes you don't turn at the right place, or sometimes you get in an accident because you're not looking where you're going. The heads-up display says, let's project the information we need to take action onto the windshield. And so right when you're looking at the real world and you're seeing superimposed there data and pictures about here, we turn here. It actually shows you where to turn. You don't have to look at the screen and figure out, oh, is that the right street? You see the turn. You see how fast you're going. So that's an example of AR. And it's a very, very powerful technology. It's in the very early stages. Pretty soon it's going to be everywhere, everything. That's the way we're going to link the digital world with us, the humans. If you go back in history, the interface between humans and products was mechanical. You get in the car, you want to turn on the radio, you look at your dashboard, there's a switch, and you just go click. I loved it. Now you go into a car, and because it's all digitized, you have a graphical user interface. And you've got all these buttons and stuff, and frankly, I can never figure out or remember how to turn on the radio. Because there's so many options on the graphical interface. That's one of the strengths. You can have a lot more control options, but the presentation on a 2D flat screen is not really very helpful for getting the user to actually do what they want to do. So we're gonna have a world of AR where, for example, you walk into your kitchen, and you're going to, by the way, AR is going to, the interface is going to be this. It's going to be just a pair of glasses like this. And those glasses are going to have the capacity to overlay data. And they're also going to have the ability to listen and to talk. So you're going to walk into your kitchen. You're going to look at your refrigerator. Your refrigerator, and your glasses are going to recognize your refrigerator. And then the refrigerator is going to start communicating with you, and it's going to show you some basic information. The refrigerator's at this temperature, everything's working normally, And then, you might say, well, do you have any milk? And your refrigerator will say, no, we ran out. But it'll say it through this digital information. It might even speak it. So the way we're going to interact with everything is going to be through this mechanism. In fact, and this is a radical thought, don't freak out, smartphones may be obsolete. Smartphone is a very inefficient typing and looking for what you want, as opposed to glasses that connect to whatever it is that you're interested in and need information to do. So we may, and that's why Apple and these companies like Apple are literally in a panic about augmented reality, and they want to try to play in that world. And so right now the big race is about the glasses. Right now we don't have real light glass. We have HoloLens. Have you heard of HoloLens? That's the Microsoft. It's kind of a headset. It's like having a diver's mask on. It's heavy. It's sort of like goggles. You can't see. The field of vision is restricted, and that's the current. The current way most people do AR is on a tablet screen, and but that's very cumbersome. The current headsets are like HoloLens. They're still cumbersome, but what we're going to do is something's going to look like this. It's going to be the glass. You just wear it all the time, and they'll have the technology built in that they can connect with the digital world and use it whenever you need it. And that will be great because I guess you can look at your emails over your glasses if you feel like it. But hopefully we'll not pay so much attention to emails every second. We'll be focused on what can we be doing that's useful, and how can we use technology to do it better. So those are a few thoughts.
Well, vertical integration merges businesses that are at a different stage of production. And then, can vertical integration be a form of shortening the value chain to the extent that it removes significantly stages from the value chains or shift them to a new type of participant in the way that changes how value is created and captured?
Well, vertical integration is an interesting topic that we've been debating and thinking about for a long time. I don't think vertical integration is either good or bad. It can be good, it can be bad. For example, in the aluminum industry, where I've worked a lot, or aluminium, if we were in England, it used to be that the firms were all vertically integrated. All the way back to the mine, and then they did the mining, and then they did this bauxite and the smelting and all that kind of stuff, and then they had their own marketing, and so there's a full chain. Everything you could do in that whole field was done by the aluminum company. What we learned fairly quickly was there was really no advantage of being vertically integrated. If you were just really good at each stage, you didn't have to put them together. You could just find a supplier who was really good at, the mining part and buy high quality, low cost ore from that person, and then some of the parts of the value chain you would do internally, depending on your capabilities, but you would outsource the rest. And whereas in other industries, you can't make things really, really efficient unless you actually control the various stages, and you can achieve the synergy across the various things in the value chain. So vertical integration is it's something that and as things change, sometimes you want to be more integrated, sometimes you want to be less integrated. And one of the things that happens in industries is we see sort of a cycle, more integration, less integration, more integration. And that depends on the technology of the day, the cost structure, supplier base available. So vertical integration is a very difficult topic, and there's no generalization about it. It's every case is different. And again, you're looking at whether integrating something in the same organization and being able to align it very, very carefully from one stage to another really gives you an advantage, or whether actually you want the best person at each stage to do their thing. and then kind of take advantage of that. That's the basic issue with vertical integration.
Thank you.
We're over the time, so if you could go to the last question? Okay.
The last question.
What factors associated with shared value lead the success of companies in international markets, and how does shared value impact on those companies?
Well, I don't know if anybody here has been exposed to the concept of shared value. This was an article that I wrote with Mark Kramer and published in the HBR in 2011. And I had been interested in many years, as had Mark, on what's the best way for companies to actually benefit society, okay? And there's been a long history of, kind of corporate efforts to engage in society, which are good. There's been a long history of companies that have not engaged very well in society. In fact, they've made society worse, through a variety of practices. But I think what we've learned is that, the most powerful way for companies to engage in society is not philanthropy. Philanthropy is just giving money. Most corporate philanthropy is you spread your donations across many different problems and causes and NGOs. And it's good, and we recommend, companies should have a philanthropic program because we all should give and we all should share. But ultimately, the impact a company is going to have through philanthropy is very small. Even the Gates Foundation says our money for the problems of the world is a drop in the bucket. We're not going to solve homelessness. We don't have enough money to solve homelessness because it's a gigantic problem. It's very complicated. So, so philanthropy, I think, is where we started with corporate impact on society. Then we moved to corporate social responsibility. And this was the idea that you should be a good corporate citizen, you should be sustainable, you should participate in your community, volunteer, things like that. And again, I think that was a step forward. You should obey the law, you should abide by ethical standards, you should have a diverse workforce. Corporate social responsibility has a lot of these things that we all know are good things. And the social responsibility movement was to get companies to raise their standards to be, responsible in each of these areas. I think that's been a good thing. We encourage everybody to keep doing that. We can keep getting better. But corporate social responsibility is really about compliance with kind of standards that have been set, and also about image and being viewed as a good company. The trouble we have with corporate social responsibility, and I'm not saying stop, but I'm just saying just realize this, it's not going to have a very big impact. It's not going to solve any of the big problems of the world. Yes, you may have sustainability in your company, but that's not going to solve the environmental issues of overuse of resources, okay? Every company can do a little tiny bit, but if this is just being responsible, then and if you're checking the box. Right now we have this whole system of ESG indicators, environment, social, governance. Companies now get rated on these indicators, and it's good to have a high rating, and investors sometimes want a company that's highly rated, but the high-rated companies are not changing the world because they're they're checking all the boxes. They have a sustainability program, they're trying to have more renewable energy. They go through the usual suspects of things that you want to do. Shared value is different. Shared value is where you identify a social problem where your company touches that problem through your product, through your value chain. Shared value is about making a social impact in focused areas with a business model, not a charitable model, not a reputation model, a business model. If you can come up with a product that's the most environmentally powerful or best working environmental product in your industry, you can make money doing that.
Sorry, tobacco could fit into it?
The tobacco industry, the product is never going to be shared value. So the tobacco industry's got a problem. They can do some shared value in the way they operate, in terms of, they can operate in an energy efficient way. They can save water. They can reuse land. They can do shared value things in the value chain, but their product is the opposite of shared value. It's a product that serves the company's profitability, but actually harms the customer. And you know, we got to stop that. There's a lot of that that's happened. But shared value is about finding ways in which your company in your business, given what you do, can actually tackle an important social issue, whether it's poor education, or whether it's health, or whether it's environmental issues in particular fields, or whether it's lack of affordable housing, or whatever it is. And build a business model to deal with those social issues. And the magic of shared value is, if you can do that, you can infinitely scale. If you can help one person, you can help 1 million, because you don't have to keep getting more money from the government or more donations. You know, it's a self-sustaining way of social impact. So I've just scratched the surface there, but I think the shared value concept was, I think, first of all, a next step in thinking about how to be more effective at corporate social impact. But it also represents, I think, something much more than that, because what we're finding is that the competitive advantages now that are obvious have already been thought about. That actually these shared value-based strategies, serving a customer group that's never been served before, but finding a way to do that at a profit, maybe a low-income group. Shared value strategies are opening up some of the most unique new kinds of strategic positioning and value propositions. So what we're finding is that shared value is not just it's not like philanthropy. It's really a way of thinking about strategy that it allows you to see new strategies that nobody has seen before. And we were very happy that we persuaded Fortune magazine every year to create a new list, which maybe we don't need any more lists, but we thought we needed a list of companies that were actually changing the world through shared value. So the list comes out, you know, in August or September. You can look it up. You can see who's on that list. But these are companies that are not just being philanthropic. They're not just being good citizens. They're actually really moving the needle on renewable energy, or on, you know, health for low-income people, or nutrition and food. And that is the great hope we have, that business can actually take on these issues and not rely on the traditional models of government and NGOs, which tend not to be as efficient as we can be, and also tend to depend on lots and lots of money. You know, you have to give more money because that's the only way you can do more. You can have to get more money so you can do more. So the shared value concept is an effort at, you know, starting a whole new chapter of thinking about what is our role in business to really move the world in the right direction. So we're very proud of that. This is something I work on a lot. It's interesting to see around the world, there are now more and more shared value prizes. There's one in India, there's one in Japan, there's Australia, where there's a process to select companies that are doing this and publicize them and try to get more companies thinking this way. We have whole organizations of businesses in various countries that are organized around the shared value movement. So I think we're seeing a lot of interest in this idea on a global basis, and we're just hoping that there can be more and more and more, because the more companies are doing this, the better it's going to be for society and issues, social issues, but the better it's also going to be for our reputation and the trust society has in us as businesses. And right now, that is low. We're too often in business seen as the problem. We're making too much money, or we're polluting, or we're doing this, or we're doing that. And business now has a a reputation that we need to change. And if we using capitalism as the tool make very powerful impacts on particular social issues, I think that will put business back, I think, in a much better place in society, and people will, young people will be much more comfortable going into business, as opposed to thinking that to do the Lord's work you have to be at an NGO because they're solving all these difficult problems. Well, unfortunately, NGOs aren't solving them. They're just making them a little better. Whereas if we in business can invent strategies that are profitable, we can actually solve things because we can scale. So anyway, that's the concept of shared value. That was more than you were probably expecting, but you can tell that I'm very interested in this.
And I have just a last personal question. We have seen that private consumption in the last few years has been the trigger for GDP growth.
Which?
For GDP growth.
What's the trigger?
Private consumption.
Private consumption?
Yeah, in many economies. And then, but now consumers have a different way to consume. They have internet, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. On your view, what is the future on that sense from a consumption standpoint? How can it affect corporations?
Well, I think we should keep inventing better and better ways for consumers to access whatever needs they want to meet. And so, and the more effective and more efficient those mechanisms are, the better I think will be, and it'll be good for consumers. Consumption tends to be the biggest, tends to be the biggest part of GDP. It's just personal consumption. And to have sustained improvements in consumption, people have to have jobs. They have to have a decent income. They have to be hopefully having opportunities to advance and get promoted and so forth. So I think the biggest threat to growth in economies right now is the fact that we see a lot of countries that are struggling in terms of many people having the resources and the job opportunities to actually consume. They're just hanging on. And in our country, we have a lot more inequality. We have a huge number of people that are not even though our unemployment rate is low, the way they calculate it makes it look low. But there's a lot of people that are not really productively in the economy, and they're not earning a decent living. They're not earning enough money to pay for their lives. They need public assistance. So I think we need to, and that's because perhaps economic policy is not creating competitiveness and opportunities for all the citizens, so, which is happening in our country. So I think consumption is rooted in the resources to consume. And again, it all starts with a healthy economy, with a competitive economy, and the ability for every citizen to be part of the productive workforce and to work productively so they can earn a decent living. And if that happens, consumption is going to be the engine that drives economy. Government, borrowing money, all those things are very dangerous. What we want is to create a better situation, better lives for all our citizens. And if we do that, then I think that's the foundation for an economy that we want. So, good. I guess, we're probably out of time or over time. But thank you for having me. It's great to be here, and hope all you students, become the solutions to all the problems that we can all see in front of us. And you have a different mindset than the traditional politicians have, and the traditional folks in thinking about the world. And I think we have another generation that's really quite different coming online, and that's a great hope that we all have. Thank you.